Smells like football, baby.
What's up, guys? Welcome into the Fantasy Football Smackdown. It's waiver wire sniping ahead of Week 10. Of course, you got to get those lineups set for Week 9. It's bye-week hell right now, so it's tough to stash players this weekend. But if you do have extra roster spots, utilize those IR positions as always. Maybe these are the guys that you can stash on your bench ahead of the waiver wire next week. So waiver wire sniping, you guys know the drill. Here we go. If you're watching on YouTube, you're checking us out on Saturday afternoon, maybe Sunday on the podcast, but we go from 6 teams on by this week to 4 teams next week in Week 10. Baltimore, Cincinnati, New England, and the New York Jets. Again, Ravens, Bengals, Pats, and Jets are all on bye next week. So a little bit of relief compared to the Week 9 slate with 6 teams on bye, but still some heavy power out this upcoming week as well. When you're talking about streaming quarterbacks, now that Justin Fields has graduated over the 50% threshold, it's still Marcus Mariota for me at the top of the board. 32% owned. He's going up against Carolina for the second time in 3 weeks. That's going to be on Thursday Night Football in Carolina. Mariota just put up 24 fantasy points against the Panthers this last week in Week 8. So Mariota is a guy that I can pick up and stream right now and feel pretty good about it. So he's my number 1 streaming quarterback. If I'm stashing players. Number 2 is Daniel Jones. They'll be coming off of the bye here, 42% owned versus the Houston Texans. Texans have a little bit longer week to prepare, but this one's going to be in New York. Daniel Jones has been fine for fantasy purposes. That rushing's helped a ton. Number 3 is Jimmy G going up against the LA Chargers, 40% owned. Should have Debo back hopefully by next week, so full complement of weapons there. And number 4 is Andy Dalton at Pittsburgh, 14% owned. It's going to be a little bit of a shorter week. And Pittsburgh's coming off the bye, so it's a tougher matchup, but Dalton's been fine for fantasy, and you can roll him out there if you need. One note I'm going to stay here as far as stashing, this is obviously not a streaming candidate for next week, but a stash candidate. If you're pretty much streaming any of these quarterbacks right now, maybe besides Mariota, right? He's fine. You could roll with him most weeks more than likely. But Deshaun Watson, 27% owned, is a guy that you should be looking to pick up right now. I usually wouldn't say this about the quarterback position, but it has been so bad this year that I'm okay stashing out on my bench for another 3 or 4 weeks and just hoping I can make it through it. If you have the extra roster spot now, then I would go ahead and just put him on there. I think this is about the time you can do it. As we get closer to that first week of eligibility, Watson will continue. His ownership percentage will continue to rise. Moving on to the running back stashes this week, Isaiah Pacheco still continues to be a top name for me. I talked about this on last week's waiver wire sniping. I talked about it on the waiver wire show. And at 31% owned, his ownership has actually decreased. Now, of course, that's dealing with the bye weeks this week. It's been tough for teams. There's a lot of injuries on guys that people have been counting on. But Pacheco's a guy that his story hasn't really changed over the last 2 weeks, but his ownership percentage has fluctuated. I still think Pacheco is going to be the lead back there, while albeit in a 3-man committee. But as I keep saying, is if Pacheco does work his way into just at least as being a 2-man committee and start seeing the majority of those touches, this is 31% owned is crazy. He should definitely be stashed as of now. We've only seen 1 week of him as the starter, quote unquote. We're going to see it this week. So I'd at least want to have that lottery ticket on my bench. If after this week, it's still strictly a pretty even 3-man split with each guy having their role like we saw 2 weeks ago, then yeah, you could probably leave Pacheco on the bench, but at 30 or on the wire, but at 31% owned, I'm not taking that chance that someone else could pick him up. Number 2 is Alexander Madison, still 45% owned. Talked about this the last couple weeks as well. Now that his ownership dipped below 50, he's a top value handcuff. He would be leading every single waiver wire column next week if Dalvin Cook was to miss it any time at all. And those are the types of players that you should be stashing. Number 3 is Cam Akers. We've made it through the trade deadline now, and Cam Akers is still an LA Ram. We've seen Darrell Henderson, the crazy split last week. He's clearly there's not much faith there in Henderson, and that's been the case for years now. Now, while Akers might have a tough time working his way back into the lead position of this backfield, I think since he's still on the Rams at 40% owned, he should still be stashed on your roster. And then Rachaad White is similar to Madison, just a handcuff at 32% owned, just another guy that you could just take a flyer on and see if he works his way a little bit more into that offense and or, knock on wood, we don't want to see injuries, but that's what you have to prepare yourself for in fantasy football. Wide receiver stashes. Wan'Dale Robinson, the roller coaster ownership percentages for Robinson have been crazy. It was way down, obviously, before he worked his way back from injury. Then he saw some monster target games, caught a touchdown, flew almost to over 50% to make himself ineligible for these types of shows, but now he's down to 27%. I know it wasn't a great week for Robinson last week, and again, their benches are thin this week, right? It's hard to stash these types of players, but I still think Robinson's going to be one of the top passing options in this Giants offense, and at 27% owned, he should continue to see targets and is somebody that should be a little bit more owned across redraft leagues right now. Number 2 is Michael Gallup. Ownership percentage also dropped this week with the Cowboys heading into a bye week. And while he's still working his way back from injury and hasn't been 100%, I do think that he will work his way as the number 2 option in this offense post-bye week for the Dallas Cowboys down the stretch. Number 3 is Donovan Peoples-Jones, 22% owned and coming off of 3 straight games of 70 yards or more. And as I mentioned earlier with Watson, if Peoples-Jones continues to be the clear number 2 target in this offense behind Amari Cooper, once Deshaun Watson is back, I love the upside for Peoples-Jones. Number 4 is Van Jefferson, 11% owned. His ownership percentage dropped this week due to him being ineffective in his limited snaps last week, but it was his first week back from injury after missing almost half the season. I'm still stashing Van Jefferson in hopes that he can be the number 2 option in that offense. And don't forget, Cooper Kupp a little bit banged up right now. And number 5 is Treylon Burks, 17% owned. The rookie is eligible to return off of IR here shortly. Haven't heard many reports out of Tennessee camp on what Burks' status might be, but that's not something that differs from many teams. So I'm still stashing Burks right now if I can, but it's deep. Obviously, 4 wide receivers I would take above him and probably stash most of the running backs over him as well. And this is my honorary Jameson Williams mention that I give him every single week, 23% owned. IR stash. Tight end streamers next week. We get a few guys back potentially. Greg Dolch being the main one at 35% owned. Unless you banked on Isaiah Likely, who I'm totally fine picking up, but he's heading into a bye. Dolch is a guy coming off of a bye after week 9, and he's been a top 10 tight end for fantasy owners since he's been given the chance to return from injury. Dolch at Tennessee, 35% on top of the board, clearly far and away. And if you've been struggling at tight end, you need to prioritize this now while he's on a bye week because everybody and their mother is going to be looking for him next week. Number 2 is Cade Otton. Seems like he's going to get a chance once again this week to be the starter with Cameron Brate out versus Seattle, 8% owned, but Brate's status will impact Otton's value going forward. And Daniel Bellinger, he'd be above Otton, honestly, if I knew for sure he was going to be back. There are reports that he could return. The Giants elected not to put Bellinger on IR, so he's eligible to play as soon as they feel he's healthy enough. He gets the Houston Texans, only 2% owned now. That ownership percentage dropped quite a bit. And the DST streamers, there's a couple here. One thing I will say, I don't play in a lot of leagues with DSTs, and you guys might not either. But with the Dallas Cowboys being on bye, I saw them dropped in one of the leagues that I play with DSTs. Their ownership percentage over on Yahoo is still 88%, so they're still widely owned. But just double check. Maybe that could be somebody that somebody tries to drop Dallas right before kickoff, as an example, to pick up a streamer. But if that team was not held, the Cowboys defense has been really good for fantasy. Back to the streamers, sub 50% owned. New Orleans Saints going to be on the road at Pittsburgh. A little bit of a short week, and Pittsburgh will be coming off the bye. But Kenny Pickett, 33% owned. New Orleans Saints, top of the board. And the Tennessee Titans, going to be at home against the Denver Broncos, 22% owned. They're also a fine stream candidate for week 10. All right, there you have it. Appreciate you guys checking out this show. Subscribe wherever you're listening to this, as always, of course. I'm going to be back at it next Tuesday with the Waiver Wire show, getting you ready for week 10. So hopefully we're talking about some of these same names then, and you're already ahead of the game. So good luck in week 9. Get those lineups set. Bye, NATO, but we'll survive. And I'll catch you boys later on next week. I'll see you.